like to introduce our next speaker. I'm very happy to introduce Sophia Acord. Did I say it right?
Yes.
Okay, well you can come up and say it yourself. She is brand new to UF. She is the new Associate Director of the Center for the Humanities and the Public Sphere as of this past August. And before coming to UF, she was a specialist researcher at the Center for Studies in Higher Education at the University of California, Berkeley, where she managed the Andrew Mellon Foundation funded project called Future of Scholarly Communication Project. And she also conducted qualitative research in scholarly communication and publication behavior, scholarly reward systems, research support services, interdisciplinary collaboration, online textbooks, and open educational resources. Her most recent Mellon-funded project, where is that coming from anyway? It sounds like somebody's playing percussion in the background. Her most recent, maybe this is too close, okay. Her most recent Mellon-funded project focuses on the meaning and locus of peer review for publication, and it will be published shortly. Dr. Acord holds a PhD in sociology and a Master's of Research Methodology from the University of Exeter in the United Kingdom, and a BA in sociology and anthropology from Swarthmore College. And I really look forward to her presentation on assessing the future landscape of scholarly communications. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I think most of the other speakers already did my work for me, which is always nice. Can you hear me if I speak without the mic?
Yes.
Clearly?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
let's do that. As Isabel said, for the past 5 years, I've been studying scholarly communication, but I'm a social scientist, so I'm interested in faculty reward systems, faculty values, the needs that faculty have to communicate research that can be in a variety of formats, genres, or products. We just, in January, this 5-year study came to a close, and we published a 770-page document, peer-reviewed in the institutional repository. It's open access. It's available right there. Great. So I don't have time to summarize it today, but you can go and look at it further. Very quickly, I'd like to know who I'm speaking to. Who here is coming from a library perspective? Okay. Do we have any research scholars in the audience? Be faculty, graduate students, postdocs? Fantastic. Any publishers? Okay. Any faculty who edits publications? No. Okay, that helps me enormously know what to talk about and what not to bother talking about. So as I said, we were a team of social scientists, although we had a chemical engineer on the team as well, Jed King. And we were interested really in looking at faculty values and needs. Not if we build it, will they come, but why do faculty do what they do? And how are they trying to resolve the crisis in scholarly communication themselves? And the big premise and finding of our study is that disciplinary culture matters enormously. There is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all solution to open access publishing and to the crisis in scholarly communication. So very quickly, we interviewed over 160 scholars over the course of the 5 years, went to an enormous number of different meetings. We were interested mostly in scholars from R1s, the former R1 Carnegie classification, although not exclusively, especially in the humanities. You have a lot of important research active scholars that don't need the infrastructure that would bring one to a large research institution. And we produced 12 very thickly described disciplinary case studies in these fields. If you have an interest or in any of these fields, or represent faculty or work with faculty from any of these fields, I would direct you to the case studies. Very quickly, we looked at a range of topics in scholarly communication, ranging from publishing, to tenure and promotion, to how you share your data, to how you collaborate, to how you use digital technologies to collect new forms of research. Do you engage with the public? That, by the way, is a very short chapter. And needs and the future. What's on the future? What's on the horizon that's going to change the way you work and communicate your work? We found in one slide, but there are systems that scholars in different fields use to do their work. And even though that's the case, even a first-year graduate student or even a first-year undergraduate student can name off the top of their head what the top outlets are. They know that they need to be published in those. And so there's this really strange situation where faculty really like to consume electronic forms of work and electronic access to monographs in the Google Books project, etc., but they don't want to be published there. They love the experiments, but not with my paper, not with my book. But the really interesting thing we found is faculty are much more innovative when it comes to open access and digital publishing with their in-progress scholarly communication. So those are ideas in progress, polished drafts of work you want to share with people, data, primary source materials, etc. So that may be that. And I think when we talk about open access publishing, we tend to focus just on the latter of those two things, on final archival publication. And that's kind of the yin of scholarly publication. But the yang is the primary source material and all of these other kinds of green material, protocols, etc. And we need to think about how we're going to create and maintain open access to those things as well. So very briefly, in order to understand the future of scholarly communication, it's important to understand the presence. And the presence is enormously diverse. Different fields communicate in dramatically different ways. So in high paradigm fields, such as astrophysics, they're actually, the archive was mentioned by Dean McClellan earlier at Cornell. It's now at Cornell. And scholars there, as soon as they have a polished draft of something ready for submission to a journal, they deposit it in the preprint server. And there's not a fear that you'll be scooped or that your data could be wrong or things that keep scholars in other fields from sharing, because if your data comes from a telescope, no one's going to debate about its veracity. It's there, so that's less of a barrier to sharing in that field. We're seeing the quantitative social sciences moving a lot in that direction. The big reason that economics, for instance, makes such heavy use of the Social Science Research Network to share working papers and preprints is because it can take 4 to 7 years to get published in a flagship economics journal. That's too long for many people, understandably. So now you get it out, you get it cited, and again, there's a culture that's okay, I'm not going to scoop you, especially if you're a senior scholar. Computer science, of course, fantastic model, peer-reviewed conference proceedings. Conference proceedings in computer science are actually more stringently peer-reviewed than final archival journal publications in most other fields. In the humanities, of course, still heavily dominated by the monograph because of the cognitive need to present a closely reasoned argument. But we are seeing journals growing in importance as a means to disseminate shorter pieces of work, to test drive things for a monograph, for instance, or maybe instead of a second book, you put together a bundle of journal articles for promotion. But what's also interesting in the humanities is the rise of digital technologies, digital archives, GIS, geographic information systems, 3D spatial modeling and classics and archaeology, and other new ways of capturing and presenting data that are presenting challenges to the traditional monographic form. Then you have fields like musicology, which embraces everything under the sun. You have software, you have performance, you have journal articles, you have monographs, you have curated primary source material, etc. And then finally, I think when we talk about open access journal publication, as witnessed by the 3 people that spoke to us earlier, we're generally talking about the lab sciences. We're talking about fast-moving, well-funded, highly competitive fields with commercial potential. And they, by and large, have very fast publication turnaround. So time is not an issue. I mean, we heard that it is 3 months, 7 years. There's much quicker peer review in many fields, especially molecular and cell biology and chemistry. You do have some open access journals rising in prestige, particularly the Public Library of Science. It's important to note that some of these journals have different peer review models than others. PLOS One, for instance, has a different peer review model than PLOS Biology. Those distinctions are noted in tenure and review promotion. And forget preprint servers. Forget about it. You need to get credit. You need to get your next grants. Not a lot of sharing, but a lot of digital technology use that's pushing the kinds of supplementary material that you need to be able to include in your publication and thus archive away. What do all of these fields have in common? Peer review. Peer review, peer review, peer review. It's the only way to assign prestige to something, and for scholars with a very limited amount of time in their busy workday, it's the only way to decide what you're going to read and what you're not. It's a filter as well. It's a filter in terms of output, and it's a filter in terms of input. We also found, surprisingly, that young scholars are perhaps the most conservative in the academy. For instance, even in economics, where everyone, or astrophysics, where a lot of people are sharing preprints, you don't see young scholars doing it as much, mainly because no one's going to read your work until you've established yourself as a peer by publishing in a flagship journal. So a lot of conservative behavior among so-called digital natives. They tend to adopt the disciplinary culture of their field. Of course, the problems with peer review are as old as peer review itself, and they're getting worse. The enormous delay costs that you get when you try to submit and have to resubmit and find the right journal, the right audience, editors that have too much power, who may not be practicing scientists in some fields. Can peer review really deal with problems of fraud and validation? The evidence says no. Reviewers simply don't have time to review large swaths of supplementary material. Information wastage, what happens to everything that doesn't get published? Someone probably wants to know about it. There's this great journal in mathematics, Rejecta Mathematica, some of you may know. Yeah, okay, it's published 4 articles so far. Articles that can't get published any other place. So that's an attempt of scholars to address information wastage. But I'd say the biggest problem with peer review, as addressed by Dean Russell and others, is the enormous costs it exacts, not only financially, but also in terms of time for scholar referees. Dean Russell said that we pay for peer review publication twice. We pay for it 3 times. Because we also I'll repeat it. We pay for it to pay scholars' salaries to do the research. We pay to buy the research back, but we also pay scholars to review and edit for free. And that is an enormous amount of time. The average time that somebody spends on a journal-linked article in their field ranges 5 to 7 hours of review. That's a day's work. The top scholars get hundreds of these a week. So there have been some really interesting new models and experiments to address peer review. Some more in a traditional mode, so you have mechanisms to credit reviewers. So you would publish the review alongside the article, and in that way the reviewer gets credit, scholarly credit on their CV, kind of like a book review. Bpress Author Banks has this, if you submit something as an author, the speed with which your submission is reviewed is dependent on whether or not you review someone else's submission. So trying to instill some sort of formal quid pro quo system. You also have more journals and consortia of journals or publishers coming together to say, I will accept reviews from your journal. So if somebody is rejected and has to resubmit, you don't have to send it out for review again. Similarly to that, some interesting models like in BMC Biology and also in Bpress, where an editor will get a submission and say, I like it, but not for this top journal. This isn't so important. We're going to put it in this journal. So again, you avoid the time delay inherent in rejection and resubmission. More radically, you have the open peer review experiments. And these are not just in the sciences, they happen in the humanities and the social sciences, although mostly around new media work, which that's another story. And these are just things where you put when something's submitted, it goes up on the web, and anybody and their mother can comment on it in peer review. And then editors and authors try to make sense of all that, and there's, again, various examples of how it's been done. In some cases, as in the Atmospheric Chemistry and Physics journal, this open peer review process actually happens at the same time as a traditional double-blind peer review process. Nature tried it for 6 weeks, concluded that it didn't add anything, has stopped. Another more radical way to think about peer review is bibliometrics. What if we just put everything out there and we let the masses decide decide by how they cite it, how they blog about it, how they tweet about it, if they're Facebooking about it, etc. PLOS One has a lot of different user metrics. They're out there. Somebody should really study them and tell us if they're valuable. My sense is they can be easily gamed, and we don't know quite what they measure. There's also some interesting things in the humanities and in science regarding post-publication peer review. So the online dissemination of book reviews through listservs, for instance, or Faculty of 1,000, where faculty comment on interesting, cool things that they've read this week. Although that tends to be the same things in the top impact journals. So again, questionable as to the value added in those experiments. So evaluating these things, open web-based peer review. As one scholar told me, do you really want your work to be reviewed by somebody that has nothing better to do than sit and review work all day, troll through these databases? There's a real question as to how you can motivate the right people to review. These things also suck up a lot of editorial time, and there's a question as to whether or not you need all these voices even weighing in. What does that mean for trying to construct a closely reasoned argument? Maybe this debate should be happening in a post-publication form. Again, citation metrics, they can be easily gamed. Difficult to know what they're measuring. Not much for fraud and plagiarism detection. And one thing that I think is the most insidious about these problem with these open peer review experiments is they create echo chambers. If you have this mass of information from every discipline, every walk of life out there, people tend to really zero in on their friends, on their little communities, and ignore what else is going on. So the canon, the scholarly canon gets very fractured. Andrew Abbott refers to this as generational paradigms. And that can pose a lot of problems for recording the advance of knowledge in a discipline, or even tracing it in a networked way. So what do faculty want? They don't want to worry about how they're going to access their scholarship, as being librarians, you know. They want speed to publication in the highest prestige possible, but they want to make sure they're reaching the right audience. So not just any venue will do, because your work is only useful publication-wise if it's being read by the right people. They want filters. They don't want to slog through things. Now I've heard, especially from social scientists at the higher levels, they're happy to slog through a lot of blogs every day. That's okay. They can judge what's good and what's not, but they fear that their graduate students cannot. And they fear that people won't. People who don't yet understand the difference between good and bad work will become active citers of those things. They want support for their data, and again, they want to advance in their field, and I think that's a really real concern that we have to be aware of. And I know, Isabel, you kept saying that you have to make sure if you're using this open access fund that it's for a journal that's going to help you. And so I think that that's extraordinary, and we really need to make sure to help scholars find those right outlets, and to help them be open access. Nevertheless, faculty like publishing electronically in a variety of ways. I apologize, I want to try to stick to the time, so I'm breaking my cardinal rule of having way too much text than I can talk about. I think we've already covered a lot of the forms of open access publication going on. Nobody's talked about overlay journals. Do you all know what overlay journals are? No? Okay. Imagine if when somebody wanted to, a scholar has something that they're ready to publish, they put it in their institutional repository or their disciplinary repository, like Archive or SSRN. And then publishers come along and say, okay, I'm going to pick this, this, and this, and I'm going to peer review it, and I'm going to put my stamp on it and publish it, and let everyone know that it's in my next issue. But it always lives in the repository, so it's always open access. So you get a table of contents alert, and the thing in the repository gets updated with the peer-reviewed version, and it gets a little stamp saying, I've been peer-reviewed by the American Philological Association, but it still lives there in the repository. So you don't have a versioning problem with final archival publications and preprints in the repositories. I don't know why people aren't talking about this. I think we should. Okay, I'm the Associate Director of the Center for the Humanities, and I want to be very clear that there's a lot of reasons why humanists in particular are resistant or aren't in the audience right now. The first being, of course, the monograph. We're not at the tipping point for digital monographs, we know that. Royalty-based work is not something that repositories want to get into. There's also, it's very difficult to get prestige associated with new journals, be they open access or not. I think in the sciences they've had a lot of really good success. I think of molecular biology of the cell as a very recent example. It has a very good scholar editor board. How can we incentivize those things in the humanities? And finally, gold open access, aka author side funding models, may literally be not financially sustainable in the humanities because they publish less articles. Humanists don't have the funding reserves. So you can imagine if a science publication that puts out short articles, 100 of them, at $3,000 a pop, versus a humanities journal that puts out 4 articles at 40 pages each at $1,000 a pop, the numbers are difficult. Mary Waltham did a great study funded by Mellon on that. With that said, scholars in the humanities and social sciences, as well as the sciences, have some very pressing publication needs that are not met by the current environment. And so when we think about how we can harness our repositories, our scholarly societies, and our presses to create open access publication models, this is where I think we need to be thinking. So the first, again, high quality, affordable, prestigious journal and monograph publishing spaces. The American Philological Association is trying to do just this. How can a repository and a university press help them? Maybe the society does the peer review. They're very good. They're a society of peers. That's what societies do. And someone else does the publishing apparatus. Second, new models of publication that can accommodate various kinds of new media. And third, this yang of scholarly communication, all of the primary source material. I'll speak very briefly about the second and third of those needs. The new media, new venues, lots of different examples there. You have ethnomusicological visual field notes, 3D reconstructions and archaeology, geographic information system-based spatial arguments in history, for example. These things need help and they need to be peer reviewed. And they want to be open access. How can we build those systems? And then in terms of infrastructure, we've heard one of the biggest problems is that in biology, in cell biology for instance, let's say you find something wrong with a cell line. There's no way to point out that error without publishing an article saying, hello guys, I found an error. So of course most things go unreported. So how can we build systems, data curation systems that are peer reviewed where your contributions are measured in a way that tenure and promotion committees understand? And that, perhaps these sorts of things are where bibliometrics could be really helpful. How many people have used this cell line? How many people are using this protocol? Perhaps you could mine syllabi that faculty post online to see where protocols are located. So that's a real impact measure, not a hypothetical one. So there's my challenges. And finally, I want to talk about the elephant in the room. We talked about a smaller elephant earlier today, and that's the elephant, which is the migration of copyright over to commercial entities. I think this is a bigger elephant. I think that a lot of the problems in the future of scholarly communication that are tied in open access is an important part of solving these problems come down to this, the concern that we are starting to outsource our institutional peer review decisions to proxies, to journal editors, to editors of monograph series, and we're simply reusing those peer reviews by counting impact factors instead of actually reading the material itself and coming up with good ways to encourage quality external peer review letters. Of course, it's normal that we would outsource this decision. Knowledge is exploding. It's becoming very specialized. I'm in sociology. I don't really know what some of my quantitative colleagues do. So you can understand why you need to maybe think about alternative ways to assess their CVs. But there's a lot of dangers to doing that. It results in a publications arms race, which is trickling down. We've heard that now 2 monographs are required for tenure in a lot of humanities disciplines at not the most highly competitive institutions. The national ranking schemes and international ranking schemes are making this even worse. by the way, I think you could ask some very interesting questions about what Thomson Reuters does with all of the data that they get from universities and what their relationship is to the Times higher education ranking scheme. Again, something else that needs to be researched. There's the migration of copyright problem, and the sum total of all this is that scholars are exhausted, and just struggling to keep their head above water. This, by the way, these working papers is the project that Isabel referred to that we're about to publish. The fourth of these working papers actually studies open access faculty resolutions at different universities and provides a list of successful ingredients of successful resolutions. And we had a variety of people from Harvard, MIT, Michigan, Virginia, Duke, Stanford who weighed in on what didn't work. So look for those. Look for those before you start a discussion at Florida. We failed at UC, so I can speak about that experience as well. So here are the tips that we're putting out. A little preview of our findings on how to address the arms race. A lot of these have already talked about. Copyright. I was so happy to hear that presentation. That is absolutely central. Supporting nonprofit and open access publication where possible, and making a distinction between commercial for-profit publishers and most scholarly societies and university presses who are the good guys, who are acting well, who aren't trying to gouge budgets. But most importantly, I think we really need to rethink the value in the process of peer review in tenure and promotion. And this could be as simple as limiting what goes through peer review or the grant-making process. You're only allowed your 4 top publications. Maybe scholars would publish a little more thoughtfully, or find alternative ways to publish and peer review things that don't need to be in an article or monograph form. I mean, how many books get written because they have to be? That's not helping anybody. But again, these really have to come, scholars grow into the environments that they're put into. So these are things that really have to come from the top down. So the funding body initiatives, I think, are a great move in this direction. And then finally, restore a marketplace for journals. I think a lot of people at UC anyway, for sure, talking about antitrust legislation as regards the bundling schemes. And then finally, you already spoke about Romeo. Fantastic. How else can we enable our students to access data? Maybe in the library catalog when they look for an article and the university doesn't own it, maybe they get a page that links to the author rights policy in place at the time that says, hey, you can email the author. Maybe it can be an iPhone app. I don't know. You didn't hear it from me. Anyway, I'm delighted for the opportunity to talk to you about all of this, and hope to continue the conversation.
Okay, I know time is limited, but do we have one question for Sophia? Sir, somebody would like to ask one question? She gave us so much to think about, so many issues and concerns, and you really are a great resource of information, so I hope you'll talk to us more and we can spend more time together talking about these issues. Super. Any questions? Okay, thank you, Sophia.